are live. Welcome, everyone.
Hi, we are so excited to be here today talking about a title or a topic, not a title, that up to a few weeks ago, I had no idea this was a thing, Daisy. Okay. And this is why there's many reasons why I adore working with you. But one of them is like, I knew I would bring it up to Daisy and she would be like, oh, yeah, I got you there. So, for anybody who doesn't know what we're talking about micro retirement, right? And it's not micro retirement for 50 or 60 or 40-year-olds, it's for Gen Zs. So give us a download on what micro retirement is. And then I have a lot of questions for you, some that might be popular and some not. And then I'd love to hear your point of view. As a reminder, Daisy and I are colleagues at Summa. And she is our superstar Gen Z, who is our social media manager and many other things. And we started this series about Gen X, me, Gen Z, her, talk about all these different titles. And today is micro retirement.
Yeah. So I'm excited for this topic. I'm passionate about it, and it is a new buzzword. But nevertheless, uh, it's something important for us to speak about because we want to let the people know what's going on. Like, why are people retiring at 19, 20, 25, right?
Yeah, so tell us about that. Because for me, like I have two Gen Z kids, right? They're in
Uh-huh.
college, they're 19. And I'm just thinking, like, they haven't even started working, but already the idea of micro retirement is on their minds. Like, that is so foreign to a Gen Xer, amiga. I mean, that's just, we just can't even comprehend it. My husband was like, but why? Why do they want to do that? Don't they like their job? So, give it to us from your perspective. Like, why is micro retirement popular? Why are more and more Gen Zs thinking about it? And where does it come from?
Okay. So the gist of this, right? Micro retirement, it's kind of what it sounds like. It's a shift of how we're thinking about our careers at instead of waiting until we are 65 to take that dream trip, that big vacation, to follow our passions. Like we're trying to take intentional breaks between jobs during our prime years, right? So it's almost like we're pressing the button to stop on our careers mid journey so we can find better opportunities and find ourselves again. So instead of us waiting all the way till the savings at the end of the journey, we're tired earlier on and we say, why don't we enjoy life while we're young? Why don't we actually enjoy our work, our savings, the things we're putting into our pot, as one may say, uh and do it when we can, as soon as possible, right? So this could look like taking shorter periods, maybe retirements of 3 months, 6 months, up to like a year. And then after that, figuring it out again and going on for the next job, for the next part of the career, for the next like climbing of, the ladder. Um, but we're subscribed to this idea. Most of my generation is, I was telling you earlier, I was having a conversation with my other like she's considered Gen Z, she's in college right now, and we were just agreeing on so many things about the why. And the whys behind it are, the type of information we've been fed since we were a lot younger have a lot to do with retirement ages getting pushed to higher numbers, right? It used to be 60, 65, and now they're increasing it to 67. Who knows what it's going to be like by the time that we get into our 50s and 40s. And we start subscribing to these ideas as a preventative measure for burnout, because one of the biggest things, as I've said it in the other chat, is mental health is so important for us. Mental health and work life balance, those two are like our bread and butter when it comes to the workforce. And so an idea like this, like micro retirement, it sounds fantastic. It sounds like, oh yeah, this is it. Like, this is
It
exactly
sounds
how
like,
life.
uh,
Yeah.
this is so great. I mean, and I love having this conversation with you because if I just read about it, I would just be like, oh my gosh, these are people who, because the con is, why are they just lazy? Are they just knowing you, working with you, you are the furthest away from somebody who doesn't take pride in their job or is lazy. Like You are amazing. And I say this to you publicly and privately. So it's fascinating to me to because I'm like, oh my gosh, something that I would have thought, as a Gen X, not as a Gen Z, clearly is, you know, are Gen Zs not concerned about not advancing in their career? And maybe it's just a
Mhm.
false narrative that we had as Gen Xers, that you always need to be present, that people need to see you, that you need to be, even when people with remote work, if you talk to older generations, they're like, oh my gosh, they'll never be promoted because they're not, you have to be there, you have to be seen, you have to be top of mind to your boss. But maybe you don't, right? Like, you and I don't live in the same city.
Mhm.
I've only seen you twice in real
Mhm.
life, right? And I so value your work. And I think
Yeah.
of how many things you could do with
Mhm.
us in our company or any other company. So that definitely demystifies that. But is there anybody concerned? And I know it's hard for you to speak for an entire generation,
Yeah.
and you're already a superstar, so that's maybe some, let me rephrase this. Any of your friends concerned that taking these breaks is gonna kind of like hurt their career? Like, is the job not going to be there? Is there a concern there once you've made so much progress and you leave? Because it makes sense to like the gig economy, right? Like when you were saying,
Yeah.
once I finish a job. So yeah,
Mhm.
I think if you're a freelancer, my previous life when I was a TV producer, there's a lot of that. And but we had a lot of anxiety instead of enjoying it. We're like, oh my gosh, where's our next gig? Where's our next paycheck? Where's our so that for gig economy, I feel that that makes sense. But like if you're like in a corporate job where you go into the office, where you're doing this, where you're like getting a promotion, is there any anxiety on like you're gonna stifle that? You're just gonna disrupt that flow?
Yeah. So let's break it down in a couple of segments because this is a good question. So the anxiety that I feel like I have, or a lot of my peers, or everybody else has, is being unfulfilled in your job. That is like one of the biggest worries when it comes to your career. I think nowadays Gen Z is definitely chasing purpose and money at the same time, and salaries, right? And it used to be that in corporate spaces, the more tenure you have somewhere, the more your salary increases. But we're starting to find that there's companies who will contract, right, by skill sets, not by tenure. And we're trying to seek out these opportunities more than ever because Gen Z is, as we know, we're multi talented. We have so many skills under our belts, whether it's by being digitally savvy. And by being digitally savvy, you have a multitude of skills that you can just gain from that, whether it's
Sure.
speaking, designing, capturing, being able to come up with creative ideas, executing project management, a wealth of them. But on top of the skills, it's also how much experience do you have, right? And even if you don't have experience in one single company, we think of gaining the experience in different companies or different ways, right? As long as we have all of that experience gained, that's where we leverage our power, right? And our anxiety, I guess the thing is, we have hit the type of news that we've consumed, everything, how fast we receive information online. We have almost been trained to see that things things are going to be shaky either way, right? Like when
Mhm.
we started entering the workforce, a lot of us literally entered when COVID happened. And
Yeah.
so as soon as we entered the economy, we took a break. And we had to
Right.
think about how intentional is this break? Like, what are we going to do in this break while we're out of college and trying to find jobs, right? On top of that, we also saw rising costs of living. And so with all of these things, and before that, I mean, we've experienced from society, like what we've been ingesting is that things are not going to be stable forever. And
Mhm.
a lot of us are like, okay, while we do seek stability, we know that at any point it it may not last. And so that's one of the reasons why we're not as scared about this entire corporate ladder, like traditional
Mhm.
path, right? The
Traditional path.
traditional
Hmm.
paths. And for those who do seek, a traditional path of staying in a career, they care a lot about that, I guess, like that passion or that purpose, to make sure it still aligns with their goals, and as well as like their networking power. Because whether they leave it or not, Gen Z also cares about network, and we kind of know, oh, it's who you know, not it's like that thing that of like who you know, not what's the other part of it.
Well, I mean that networking has always been. I mean, that's a constant for any generation, right? It's like
Yeah.
super super critical that you really
Yes.
build your social equity, and
Yes.
those connections are useful in anything. I mean, we've all benefited from them if you've had them, and if you've built them, and if you've nurtured them. So I guess that's one constant that hasn't changed. But going back to my question on like, or it was Doug's question, my husband's question of like, don't they like their jobs? Like, and obviously again, I'm a very different generation. That's why we're having the conversation of X and Z. But I remember like when I was young, when I
Mhm.
was 19, there's nothing I wanted to do in life more than work. I didn't want to go to college. I just wanted to work. I loved my work. I begged my mom to make me not go to college, but I didn't succeed. She made me go to college. But I just wanted to work. I adored my job. And maybe I had a really fun job, which I did. You know, I hosted a TV show and I was an entertainment reporter. So I was in London interviewing people, and in Paris and in New York. And I just like, just let me go on the plane with Amnesty International to Chile with Sting. And so, you know, to talk about the mothers of the disappeared under Pinochet. I just felt like, what else is there to life? And my mom would be like, hey, oye, mijita, like, why don't you go out to parties? And why don't you have a boyfriend? And I was just like, oh, no, no, no. Just let me go to another, you know, concert that talks about human rights. Like, that was my life. Like, I was, if somebody would have told me, hey, you want to take a break from that? I'd be like, oh my God, no, right? Like, I loved it so much. So is there, I mean, is there a possibility that like a Gen Z just is so enamored with their job that I like the break is not to the break from what? The break from
Yeah.
the life you've always imagined? You
Oh
know what
yeah.
I'm saying? Like,
Oh
is
yeah.
that
No, for
a
sure.
thing?
Yeah, 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 yeah. So let me clarify. Yeah, this would apply more to, not really to people who are genuinely happy about their career. They're satisfied where the path that they chose, and
Got
they're
it.
still working harder on it. Because we see that. Well, I see it all the time. We can even take influencers as an example. That now, as we know it, it is a type of career,
Right.
and they love their career and they're not leaving it. Many of them do it for years and years and years to come because it's genuinely their passion. So the breaks that they take are more intentional for mental health and self-development. But we are talking, you know, and this is why I think it's so revolutionary, because we're talking about careers and jobs that perhaps don't feel that, maybe they don't feel the spark in someone.
Mhm.
And for us, it was so crazy for us to think of someone who could stay in a career for over 20 years that they were not satisfied, right? Like
Happy.
I,
Mhm.
whenever I was in healthcare, I would work with, other receptionists or be with other people that dreaded their job. And in
Mhm.
my mind, I would be like, why don't you just quit? Like, why don't you just
Mhm.
unsubscribe to this? Like, why haven't you tried to change careers ASAP, like now, right?
Right.
To actually be happy. And so that fear of changing to something different in order for us to find passion and find purpose and be genuinely happy, that's what we've eliminated from our generation. We've set the stronger boundaries. We've set the ideas that we care a lot more about mental health as well as work life balance, right? And that's
That
really where
makes
it comes in to play. Careers that maybe don't feel, or maybe just feel like a step to the next thing.
that makes sense. That makes a lot of sense. But even if you love what you do, because I'm gonna self-correct what I just said, hearing you talk about like some breaks are just and very important, not just very important for mental health or to avoid burnout. That is really true because as much as you might love something that you do, as I did, you know, when I was young, and I love what I do now too, but I just remember that like exhilaration of like, there's nothing in life but my job. I did end up in the hospital when I was 18 years old, right? I had a massive ulcer, and because I had my radio job at 5 a.m. and then I went to college because I had to. And then I had my TV job, and then I would sleep for 3 hours, and then I had tests, and then and then I had travel because, I was traveling to do all these awesome things for my job. And I had a bleeding ulcer, and I was in the hospital at 18, and my parents were like, you're going to have to pick. Like, it's either TV or radio. And I was like, oh, can I just drop out of college? And they're like, no, that wasn't a choice. So even when you love something so much, to your point, that burnout culture that we were so that still gets to you even if you love what you're doing, right? Like, so it is important for older generations to learn from this, micro retirement, or just taking care of yourself or your mental health or your burnout, because loving it doesn't prevent you from burning out, right? Like, it's just like, yeah, good for you that you love it, but you also need the breaks. And I think that's a lot from where we have to really learn from. So let me ask you something, being tactical, like,
Yeah.
what is considered a micro retirement? Is it 3 months, 6 months, a year? Like, is there a time limit? Like, how would you assess? I imagine that if something very short, like, I guess that's a vacation, but like, what would constitute a micro retirement?
A micro retirement, I think, would be timeline between 3 months to a year, possibly
Okay.
two, if someone's able to fund that. But between, yeah, 3 months to a year would be like micro retiring.
Okay. And then you just mentioned if somebody can fund that, right? Like up to
Yes.
2 years. So I guess that requires a lot of planning, right? A lot of being
Mhm.
rigorous with your budgeting, with your
Yes.
savings,
Yes.
because like, you cannot not have an emergency savings account. You actually need like a micro retirement fund, I guess, to be
It's
able to do that. So are people, I mean, I'm assuming people micro retiring are incredibly diligent about their finances. Is that fair to say?
It can be fair to say. I would say people are taking different routes to fund this. So, one of those is, of course, saving up a big chunk of cash to live off of for an entire year to cover all of your expenses. Now, for that, you would either need to save a lot of the income that you're generating, probably more than 20%. Um, I know my partner, he did that, but he was a finance, in banking, and so they were making a good amount of money. But for a lot of us who make entry level, money, I think what we think about is saving just enough to cover at least the 3 to 6 month expenses, the basic expenses that are always recurring, and then figuring out between those 3 months, to 6 months, whether we need to find a new job by the end of the third month, or if we can fund, maybe by that point we actually find side hustles, side gigs, contract work to fulfill that desire to keep going. Other people, what they do is they almost like just plan out enough to fund for a career change, for learning new skills, maybe to just, you know, apply to different jobs. I mean, there's so many ways to fund your micro retirement. But those are some of the ways that I've heard about it. And then again, I'm going to touch back on that fear element that we were talking about, right? Where it was like, well, aren't we fearful of not finding something later, or not being able to grow, or like, what if? I think the progression of technology that we've seen nowadays, of how we can genuinely find jobs on so many boards, we can connect with people online all the time, we can become more visible on in all over the world remotely. It eliminates that fear of this is not possible. Like, it makes it more real. Does that make sense? But yeah,
Yeah.
financially speaking, we do save up a good amount and then use what we have.
I get it. No, of course, I mean, everybody's gonna be able to find a job, and it's normal to be fearful of like, oh, what's my next job and all of that. What I meant earlier, more on the fear of like you're on a path to stardom in a company, right? Like you're progressing, you're next in line for this, you're next in, and if you leave, then the second choice might just fill in that role, right? And that's the person
Yeah.
that's going to get promoted, and that might be okay because you're
Yeah,
like, I hated this job
they
anyway.
can have
I
it.
don't I
It's
don't want to
yeah.
progress in the company that I don't adore. And we
Yeah.
already talked about it. If you're passionate, maybe that's a very different scenario.
Mhm.
But that's super interesting. I love this. So what would you personally do during a micro retirement? Because I
Oh,
know
yeah.
people make different choices.
I would personally travel. I would travel and be in another country for maybe a month. And then during that time, I would probably either keep pursuing my passions, which is, as you know, content creation. Um, and then from there, I would figure the rest out, whether I have to, whether I find another thing, another role to fill, or whether I go back to school. Maybe I'd consider studying back up, going back to school. I think that's what I would do in my micro retirement, but definitely travel. Definitely just be somewhere for a good month. And then from there on, yeah, just find my passion.
Couldn't you do that being a digital nomad? Also
Yeah.
travel and but
Yeah.
you
I
say
think,
but take the break fully from work, not just
oh,
travel and kind of work.
could I? So are you asking whether I could or would want to fully take a break?
No, I'm just saying for it to consider micro retirement,
Oh,
like
yeah.
if you say I'm going to take a month, and travel and maybe do a few things remotely, would
Mhm.
that not be considered more like a digital nomad was kind of like my question. Um
Could
but
be. It could be seen. Yeah. I mean, I think a lot of these new words that we're, really coming up with are already similar concepts that have existed for a while. I think what it is what how we're seeing it is we're not doing this just in our 20s. We're trying to do this
throughout, I get
throughout
it.
our lifetime. And so versus just doing it one time and then you go off another 10 years, we're like, okay, maybe a couple 5 years. And as long as we can find that purpose in our work and really genuinely be
That's the key.
satisfied with ourselves.
I love that. I love that you said that because for me, as a CEO of a company, as a co-founder, I think like we talked about this in our last session. The biggest workforce entering the workforce is Gen Z, right? So as baby boomers retire, Gen Z enters. And what are the things that you need to be, and what are the things that you need to do or show up as a company to really be able to not just hire but retain the very best talent. And hearing you say purpose is something that's very critical, right? With all the backlash of, oh, is just, do you really need to have a diverse workforce or a quota, whatever you call it, whether you call it DNI or belonging or anything like that, for Gen Z might be something that is important, that the workplace represents the world, that the workplace has values, that the workplace is working towards something that makes them feel proud and useful in this life, and connected and excited. So I think that's really important as a takeaway for us older Gen Xers and beyond as we think about the very best talent. What is going to excite them to be working with
Yes.
alongside with you, right?
Yes. 100%. Okay. I feel that one of the best things employers can do is find what we're good at. Find what
Hmm.
we are good at. Genuinely, I think from a third person perspective, it's easier to see what others are good at than you yourself knowing, sometimes when you're still figuring it out. And also offer opportunities for projects in which you know that we will excel in, even if it has maybe it's a completely different type of task, or maybe completely different from what we're used to, but offer it as an opportunity to not be like, maybe you see, hey, you've been over excelling in this exact role. Are you interested by some chance in talking to that team and going on and trying out being a part of that project? I
Right.
think like allowing us to serve our different skills, to be, you know, to be in our different skills, will really help retain great talent. Really
Right.
help us retain great talent. And that's how a lot of people I know stay in a company for a while, right? They jump, they're in the same company, but they jump from role to role. And that's what we want. That's what a lot of us Gen Zers want. But sometimes it's hard to do that when we don't know the culture too well, or perhaps it's a little bit scarier for us to navigate those waters. Um, and that's what we, yeah, that's what we can say
Okay.
for.
No, that's a very good insight. We have one comment. I don't know if it's a comment of our question,
Okay.
from somebody who's listening, and it says, "I had not heard of this term, a micro retirement, before. I took time off and found that it was easier to talk to people about it by calling it a sabbatical." We've said that, a sabbatical. Which to me meant I was being intentional about needing time to rest and recharge.
Mhm.
Usually sabbaticals, people think about them for older people, right? Like it's like, oh, if I've earned my sabbatical after God knows 15 years doing something. I have a friend who said, oh, I'm on my sabbatical, but she's probably in her 50s too. I hadn't seen it in like a 19, 20-year old, but why not? We can
And
reclaim
that's,
sabbatical at any age, and that makes a lot of
yes.
sense.
And that's why I think this is why this term, I hope it gets popularized. I mean, I don't know how, um, our peers are going to see it in other ways. But if we were, as a 20-year-old, 25-year-old, 24-year-old, to say, I need a sabbatical, they would look at us crazy, up and down crazy, right? They'd be
Well,
like, no,
don't get me wrong. Micro retirement also sounded crazy
it
to me when I
does.
read it. I was
It
like,
does.
what?
It both
Uh-huh.
sounds right, but it's a term that
Yeah.
maybe it's for us, and maybe it's one of those things where it's like, hey, if this is, I'm trying to tell you, I need a rest, because who's to say that only people who have had 15 years and tenure need a break? Who is
Right.
to say that? Like, I know many, I know there has to have been a time where somewhere in your 30s you burnt out, somewhere in your 30s you burnt out, and maybe you needed a mini break, maybe you needed a 1 month
Yeah.
break, a two
Listen,
month
I gave you my example of when I was
Yes.
18 at the hospital. I definitely
Yes.
needed a break, right? I
And
mean, I
why
had
would we
been
want
working
to have more
then.
people, yeah, like,
Yeah,
burn
I
out
had been
all the
working.
time?
Yeah, exactly. It's not an age thing. I think that's where we
Mhm.
need to shift.
Yeah.
It's like when your body, when your mind needs a break, right?
Yeah.
And so for us, that you and I work in our wealth tech, fintech company at Summa, we're trying to make sure, so more than ever it is very important that you are prepared with your finances, that you have those funds, that you are ready to go when you need that break, because if you need it and you can't afford it, that's not a great thing either. So I think that, more and more, I think that Gen Zs and Gen Xers and everybody in between, millennials and boomers, we need to make sure that we have that those savings to be able to take breaks. We have a couple. Um, okay, somebody said, sabbatical sounds so academic. Professors needed them to recharge. Sure. So, I mean, I know you like micro retirement. So here's somebody else validating that micro retirement is good. Somebody else was saying here, you can see these comments too, right, Daisy, that they
Mhm.
agree with you.
I'm
They've
a
heard
millennial.
more of Gen Z or peers discuss their career paths as involving multiple breaks
Yeah.
throughout their careers. So that makes sense. And here is somebody who is Zen,
Oh, a
Zenellial.
millennial. Yeah.
Yeah, a millennial and a Gen Z. And for her, it's Cindy Chavez. Micro retirement has always been her goal, so that's good to know. So happy that she's learning about that. It's a movement. Love working and creating and building, but I don't want burnout. I'm a professor by trade and founder by love, and sabbatical isn't enough. I need a lifestyle sabbatical. That's a great point. I love that. I love that, Cindy. Lifestyle sabbatical. And listen, there's a lot for us to learn too, right? Like
Mhm.
I mean, I'm close to that age of the retirement. I don't know that I'm going to really be retiring, as at least I'll want to do my social work and my philanthropy.
Yeah.
But it is such a good aspiration to say, listen to your body, listen to your mind, listen to your soul, even, and be like, I need a break. I really need a break. You can't only be giving when you know you need it, and to honor that. That's why I love learning from you, learning from younger generations, and how we can, be better even in our 50s or even
Mhm.
in our 60s. And I think we're out of time, but I do want to say Lynette said, I love this. Taking an intentional and planned time out, mini retirement from working, is good for one's mental and physical health. We agree. And we appreciate everybody who joined us today for this conversation. I think we all learned a lot. Hopefully, you guys enjoyed it. Anything else to add, Daisy?
Yeah, just a closing statement. I'd like to say that for employees and people, we're looking for new jobs, looking for accelerating things. Just always know that your skills are very much needed somewhere, and always offer to give those skills a try in the workplace. Maybe tell your boss, I'm really good at this. I bet you didn't know, right? And maybe they can find something for you. And for employers, just know that even though we do think a lot about work-life balance, and taking intentional breaks and speaking out whenever we are burnt out, it doesn't mean that we don't work hard and that we won't put our best effort and that we can't stay somewhere for a very long time. It just simply means that we are more we have strong boundaries and we are not afraid to speak our minds.
That's amazing. And then I'll add a third option there for entrepreneurs, as we have some founders listening. You don't have a boss, right? But you are your own boss, and to set those boundaries for yourself, because work never ends when you own your own business or when you're a founder. It's 24/7. Even if you have your phone and your laptop off, your brain is always going. But listen to your body, listen to yourself, and still take those mini breaks, even if you have nobody to let you take the breaks. If it's only you, that is still very important and very critical. I'm trying to learn that myself. But we appreciate you guys being here. Appreciate you, Daisy, as always, giving us that Gen Z perspective, which is going to be critical for anybody who works generations across and wants to, really bring out the best in the talent that we get to work with every single day. So thank you all and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you, Bea. Thank you all. Have a great one.